Well, good morning. You know, it was January 1st, 2010, and Jael and I stood on a stage in a church with a pastor and our family and some friends gathered around us, and we proclaimed how much we loved each other and how we would care for each other and till death do us part. Whether we had financial goodness or whether we were living in the poorhouse, whether we were sick or healthy. We proclaimed these words of truth, and at the end of it, nobody clapped. Nobody really cared. It was like, okay, next thing, let's keep rolling here. But January 2nd, 2010, we did the exact same thing, exact same people, threw in a few more people, and at the end of it, everyone's like, yeah, hooray, woo! Now, before you think that we got married twice, one was the rehearsal, and one was the actual wedding, right? What a difference a day makes. We said a lot of the same things, had a lot of the same people gathered, but what a difference one day makes. We don't celebrate January 1st other than a Happy New Year, but January 2nd is our anniversary and a very more important day that we remember. Nobody remembers the rehearsal day, but you always remember the wedding day. What a difference a day makes. And that's exactly what we're talking about as we step into this fourth commandment this morning, as we close out this series, Heart of the Matter. We've looked at the first four of the 10 commandments and really trying to discover, is there more to these 10 commandments than simply 4,000 plus year old commands from an angry God who was just jealous and wanted people to follow his rules and play his game? Is there more that's at play, and is there something that you and I, as followers of Jesus, have to learn and to grow from this? As we've seen as we walked through from week one, that God's command to love him and to love him alone was not a hierarchical kind of like, oh, there's other gods competing against me, I got to make sure that my domain is protected. But instead, it's actually freedom. Freedom given to his people and freedom given to us today to recognize that we don't have to try to find all the other gods and please them and honor them, but there is one God, and him alone is worthy of our praise and our adoration. And the next command that follows that is not just, hey, God doesn't want you to try to draw a picture of him. God doesn't want you to try to carve something out of him. No, there's a deeper feeling there. There's something deeper that we try to create things about God in our pursuit of worshiping God, but so often those things cause our worship to deviate. And God says, no, don't waste your time trying to fill your life with something else that's kind of like me when you can actually worship me. I'll make myself fully accessible that you can truly and fully worship me. See, these are things that don't just die out in the desert with the Israelites 4,000 years ago. These are things that have relevance to us. As Chad shared last week, this isn't about cussing and cursing. This isn't about the words, that there's certain words that God says you can't use. No, instead, there's the idea of ascribing things to God's glory and God's power that aren't really his. That our words, even today, matter. That Jesus shows up on the scene and says, your words matter, and your faith, putting that into action, matters. And so as we close out this series this morning, we're going to dive into this fourth one. The idea of Sabbath, and what does it mean to have Sabbath? What a difference a day makes. So I'm going to invite you this morning as we kick into this to turn with me to Deuteronomy chapter 5, and that's kind of where our central point in this. There's two places in the Old Testament where we find these 10 commandments. Deuteronomy 5 is kind of the second giving of these. It's not a change so much as it is a contextualization. What has happened is the Israelites have been set free from their bondage and their sin and their enslavement. And then even though they've seen these incredible things, they choose to turn their back on God. Like within days and weeks of it happening, in this incredible freedom that they experience. And so they spend 40 years wandering in the desert. And so 40 years after they've been truly set free and brought into a relationship with God, they stand at the edge of the desert waiting to walk into this promised land that they've been given. And this is where we find this in Deuteronomy chapter 5. This is what happens. Moses summoned all of Israel and said, "Hear, Israel, the decrees and laws I declare in your hearing today. Learn from them and be sure to follow them. The Lord our God made a covenant with us at Horeb. It was not with our ancestors that the Lord made this covenant, but with us, with all of us who are alive here today." This has been our opening passage for each of the past 3 weeks, right? We saw that these words were not just something in their history, but had a very real relevance and purpose for them today. Continuing on, he said, "The Lord spoke to you face to face out of the fire on the mountains. At that time I stood between the Lord and you to declare to you the word of the Lord, because you were afraid of the fire and did not go up the mountain. And God said, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. See, this is the underlying foundation for all of these commands. God has stepped into their story and rescued and redeemed them. These are not rules to get a relationship with God. No, these are provisions because of the relationship that they already had with God. The moment that God is speaking these words to them are not, hey, you know what, you're still in slavery. I'll step into your story if you can find enough money for me. I'll step into your story if you can truly show me that you'll worship me. I'll step into your story. No, all of these things are, I've already stepped into your story. I've already set you free. I've already created you. I've already called you as my people. I've already redeemed you. And these are the provisions that flow out of that relationship. That is so key for us to hold, not only with the other commands, but also as we look at this command of Sabbath. So if you kick down to verse 12 this morning, staying in Deuteronomy chapter 5, kick down to verse 12, we pick up with this fourth command. It says, observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, as the Lord your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your ox, your donkey, or any of your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns, so that your male and female servants may rest as you do. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath. You know, we have to ask the question that we've asked with the other three is, really, God? If you're going to call these people to follow you, if you're going to issue a covenant relationship with them, these are the things that you're going to prioritize? Like second on the list, God, of all the things that you would say, before murder, before lying, God, you would say, don't make things out of wood that look like me? Like, God, a fourth on the list, you would put, I care about how you spend your 1 day a week. So is there something deeper? Is there something that is deeper at the heart of the matter here? Now, interestingly, if you were to turn back a few pages into Exodus, so Deuteronomy is the 5th book of the Old Testament. If you turn back a couple books to Exodus, in chapter 20, we find that how they were given the first time varies a little bit from how Moses recalls them in Deuteronomy 5. Now, this isn't a slip. This isn't Moses, man, you weren't quite with it that day. He's done a really good job of matching it 1 through 3 and 1 through 3. But this fourth one, there's some variance. And I want you to look here for a second at Exodus 20, and we'll stay in Exodus for the rest of our time. So if you're like, I don't want to turn all the pages back to Exodus, I encourage you to go ahead and do that. Even if you're online, just open a new tab, go to Exodus. Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 through 11, this is how it's originally given. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son nor your daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. Pretty much similar compared to Deuteronomy. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them. But he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. See, Moses, when he's gathered the people before they're about to finally enter the promised land, getting ready to step into it in Deuteronomy 5, after being set free, after wandering in the wilderness, he contextualizes this, but he doesn't change it. He contextualizes it, he makes it relevant for their situation, for their 40 years of wandering in the desert, but he doesn't change the heart. And what we see in this Exodus passage from Exodus 20 is that the foundation for rest comes from God. The foundation for rest comes from God. See, the foundation for rest doesn't come because our bodies wear out. The foundation for rest doesn't come because, man, they were in the desert and you get more tired in the desert when there's sand and there's sun. No, see, the foundation for rest, he says, comes from God. We rest because God rested. We rest because God rested. Now, before you take this and say, okay, therefore we're like God, let me just issue this. God rested as a foretaste of giving us the freedom to rest. It's important for us to acknowledge that the foundation for rest comes from God. God did not rest out of necessity from being tired from all of his creating, but rather to enjoy and to flourish in his creation. See, his creating act allowed him to rest in his glory and his goodness. If you were to turn back a little bit farther into Genesis chapter 2, that's when you read these words that Moses is recalling to the people of Israel, saying that God created. That he did all these incredible works, calling things into being with his mouth, with his words. But then when it was finished, he set to enjoy it. He set to flourish, and he set to rest in his glory and his goodness. Unfortunately, too many of us work and then keel over and die, don't we? We work for rest. We can't wait. Fridays get celebrated because, man, the weekend is finally here. I'm going to get some rest. I'm going to get to enjoy what I want to do. I'm going to flourish. We work. We do all these things so that we can rest. And God demonstrates that it is actually out of rest that we flourish. It's out of rest that we enjoy. It's out of rest that we work. Because if we were to be honest, what's happening before God sets to the creating work is that he is there, isn't he? He's there. God does not create because he needs to fill it with something. God creates out of the overflow of his enjoyment and his flourishing. It's out of the enjoyment of his community, of being Father, Son, Holy Spirit, of being God in himself, complete. And out of that fullness, out of that wholeness, he sets to the work of creation. So sometimes we look at this, we're like, man, God must have been tired after 6 days of work, and so therefore he had to rest. But if we recognize that he, out of his fullness and wholeness and completeness, of being completely God and needing nothing to fill a void with, chose to create and then stepped into the act of enjoying and flourishing that. That the foundation for this rest comes from God. You know, God can't get tired. Isaiah recalls this in Isaiah 40:20. He says, "Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He cannot grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom." I loved the song that we got to sing this morning, that we got to declare that God is bigger than we thought. Can we just hold a little more sliver of that? That God is bigger than we thought, that he does not grow tired. God does not rest because he is worn out or tired, but he rests because it's in his fullness and the enjoyment. So what is Sabbath? Is it merely just rest? Is it merely about not doing something that pays us? Why of these first four provisions that God gives as he establishes these people is he concerned about keeping a Sabbath? Here's the kicker. Just as with the other commandments, they weren't meant to be killjoys or fun ruiners. They were meant to bring us Sabbath. Oftentimes when we think about Sabbath, if you've been around a church for any amount of time, if you've been following Jesus for any amount of time, chances are somebody's talked about Sabbath and Sabbath rest. And the conversation usually goes like this. What do you not do on Sabbath? Oh, do you not do something? Usually it's the absence of doing something is how we approach Sabbath. But really, Sabbath is designed to be considered a joy and a privilege. The fact that God prioritizes this as fourth of these 10 commandments, the fact that he invites the Israelites and invites us into this rest, into this fullness, into this wholeness of Sabbath, is not meant to be a killjoy of saying, oh, you can't do that. You got to sit around and be bored. You got to sit around and twiddle your thumbs. No, it's designed to be a joy and a privilege, something that brings us life. God rested not because he was tired, but because having finished the creative work, he enjoyed it. He delighted in it. He delighted in the fullness of who he was prior to creation, and out of chaos, God brought order and life. And then he rested. He enjoyed that. He experienced the joy of his fullness glorified. I want to take a sidebar just a few seconds this morning to recognize that it is out of chaos that God does his creative work. It's out of chaos and out of slavery that God redeems and calls his people. It's out of chaos that Jesus steps into the scene. Not saying, get it cleaned up, and then I'll step into your story. But when there's darkness and chaos, when there's fear, when there's animosity, when there's anger, when there's pain, when there's heartbreak, when there's, I don't know what's coming next, on a personal level or on a global scale, those are the moments that God most clearly shows up and is glorified. I'm not making that just based on 2020 or 2021 or 2022. I'm making that based on, we look at human history and even before that. You look at creation, how God, out of chaos, calls into order and creates life. And so it's perfectly entwined that we would talk about Sabbath and recognizing who God is and his authority and his work out of chaos. On a morning that we've prayed about what's happening in Ukraine. In a morning that I know that there are people who are gathered that say, I don't know about the next. Because there's pain, because there's hurt, because there's anxiety, because there's fear in my life. And friends, the freedom that comes with that, the freedom that comes with that is why God puts that forth in these. Is that out of chaos, God works. As they're standing in the desert, it is not, man, everything's great, we're already in the promised land. No, it's there is still chaos yet to come. But I'm inviting you to rest with me. So the basis for Sabbath delight, for Sabbath rest, for this Sabbath fullness is from the very beginning because God did it. But there's also an aspect that becomes even more clear for the Israelites in this command if we step back just a few more chapters in Exodus. So I know we're going backwards, but it works out okay. If you want to go with me to Exodus chapter 14 this morning, this is what happens. They have been taken out of the land of Egypt. They've been led out of the land of Egypt. All the plagues have happened. We've talked about that in the last 3 weeks. The plagues that have happened, the steps that God orders to set them free from being enslaved in Egypt. But they run into one very big problem, the Red Sea. And it says, Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove back the sea with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. The waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea, not in chaos, not on little boats that they had constructed, but they walked across on dry land with a wall of water on their right and on their left. To me, walking in the middle of water on both sides feels a little bit like chaos. I've told Jael multiple times, I will not go on a cruise. I like being on dry land, and I like being on dry land and not with walls of water beside me. That would be chaos. But there's an invitation to walk into the middle of it, knowing that God has opened that up. It says the Egyptians pursued them. This is the very next verses. The Egyptians pursued them, seeing that there was this wall of water on the left, wall of water on the right, and dry ground. And Pharaoh's horses and chariots and horsemen followed them into the sea. During the last watch of the night, the Lord looked down from the pillar of fire and cloud at the Egyptian army and threw it into confusion and chaos. He jammed the wheels of their chariots so that they had difficulty driving. And the Egyptians said, let's get away from the Israelites. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians and their chariots and horsemen. Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea went back to its place. The Egyptians were fleeing toward it, and the Lord swept them into the sea. The water flowed back and covered the chariots and horsemen, the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed the Israelites into the sea. Not one of them survived. This, in case the first 10 plagues, in case all the ways that God stepped into their story, in case the ways that he showed himself very faithful and showed himself very powerful, in case those, were forgotten already, and the Israelites didn't remember them, this is the first real act of relationship between God and these people. For 400 years, they've been enslaved in Egypt, and God is beginning a new, revived relationship with them. And this is how it begins. Wow. And we're like, man, if that happened to me, if I walked over to Lake Zorinsky and it all of a sudden parted, and let alone the Red Sea, let alone a major body of water, if I just walked over to Zorinsky and all of a sudden the wind started blowing and there was dry ground and water over here, I would remember that. I think I might even remember it more than I remember January 1st or January 2nd put together. That is just abnormal and something powerful has happened. However, you turn a few pages to Exodus chapter 16. Not much time has passed. It says this, in the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death. This is one of the passages that I'm just going to have a dialogue with God someday and be like, did they have short-term memory loss? Is there something in the desert that they ate that really tripped them out that they forgot that? Because seriously, They're talking about it was better to be enslaved than experiencing their freedom. They had forgotten on the incredible ways that God had already acted on their behalf, in the incredible ways that he had invited them into a relationship already, in the incredible ways that out of chaos and bondage and pain and heartbreak, he had set them free. And they're grumbling because their tummies are rumbling. Then the Lord said to Moses, I will rain down bread. I hear them, and I have not forgotten them. He says, I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions. On the sixth day they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other days. So Moses and Aaron said to the Israelites, in the evening you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt. And in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we that you should grumble against us? So he said. So this is the idea that gets communicated back to these people, that they have forgotten what has been done. And so God says, you know what? I'll step into your story still. I'm not abandoning you. You want to grumble? Let me show you. So we skip a few verses down to 13. That evening, here's the fulfillment of that. That evening, quail came and covered the camp. And in the morning, there was a layer of dew around the camp. And when the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, what is it? For they did not know what it is. Moses said to them, it is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. It's what God has stepped into your story to give you. This is what the Lord has commanded. Everyone is to gather as much as they need. Take an omer for each person you have in your tent. The Israelites did as they were told. Some gathered much, some gathered little. And when they measured it by the omer, the one who gathered much did not have too much, and the one who gathered too little did not have too little. Everyone had gathered just as much as they needed. Then Moses said to them, no one is to keep any of it until morning. And if you've read this before, you know exactly what happens. However, some of them paid no attention to Moses, forgot about the Red Sea, forgot about the fact that God is all-powerful, God is the one who created them, God is the one who called them into relationship, and said, I'm not really going to listen to you. And they kept part of it until morning. But it was full of maggots and began to smell. So Moses, like each of us would be, was angry with them. Each morning, everyone gathered as much as they needed, and when the sun grew hot, it melted away. On the sixth day, remember the command on the sixth day was to gather twice as much. So on the sixth day, they gathered twice as much, 2 omers for each person, and the leaders of the community came and reported this to Moses. He said to them, this is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow is to be a Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord, a day of resting in the fullness and the wholeness of who God is, of resting in his provision. So bake what you want to bake and boil what you want to boil. Save whatever's left and keep it until morning. Now, some people have to be scratching their heads saying, but wait, on days 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, we couldn't do that. It turned ucky, there was maggots. I tried that on day 4. Man, by day 5, it was stinky. So they saved it until morning, as Moses commanded, and it did not stink or get maggots in it. Eat it today, Moses said, because today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today is holy to the Lord. Today is set apart to the Lord. You will not find any of it on the ground today. 6 days you are to gather, but on the 7th day, this day of holiness, this day that's set apart, this day of wholeness and rest, of enjoyment of who God is, there will not be any. However, or nevertheless, some of the people went out on the 7th day to gather it, but they found none. Just imagine that somewhere in some tent in this camp, there is a husband who got up to get some, and the wife comes back and like, Moses told you, they told you it would not be there. They went on the 7th day to gather, but they found none. Then the Lord said to Moses, how long will you refuse to keep my commands and my instructions? Bear in mind that the Lord has given you the Sabbath. The Lord has given you the Sabbath. And that is why on the 6th day he gives you bread for 2 days. Everyone is to stay where you are on the 7th day. No one is to go out. And so the people rested on the 7th day. See, this is what's wrapped up in this, in Deuteronomy 5, when we look at this, the second giving, is that it's tied into the freedom that was given, the incredible act that God did in parting the Red Sea and calling them across dry land, into the promise of this promised land. But also wrapped into it is that God provided in the midst of the desert, in their grumbling, in their angeriness, in their frustration, in their doubt of who God was and his goodness, God provided for them in incredible and in really amazing ways. But there was something that called to them on the end of each day and especially the end of the sixth day. Was this going to be there the next day? The reason that people went out on days 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and got 2 days worth is because they said, I'm not sure this is going to be there tomorrow, so I'm just going to pack a little extra. I'm going to put a little in my pocket in case that this all runs out. In case that God decides to step out of this story, that he's done with us. He doesn't want to be a part of this anymore. No, it required them to trust God. Day 6, hey, there's not going to be any tomorrow, so you got to take 2 days worth. I don't know, last time I tried this, it got stinky and there was gross maggots. Trust in who God is, in his provision, in his story, in his action. God stepped into their story, providing through the Red Sea and providing through provision in the desert. See, he redeemed them and rescued them when they had no hope and no way of redeeming themselves. Really, the heart of the matter is the right use of the day, isn't it? See, when we are called to remember the Sabbath, it's a call to join God in his redemptive work for the sake of those who otherwise cannot redeem themselves. And if you've been around Community Covenant Church for any amount of time, you know that this is way too long of a main point for me because we like to keep it simple. But this is one of those complex things that there's just no way of shortening it. That this call to join with God, to remember the Sabbath, to keep it holy, to recognize that it is wholeness and fullness, is a call to join God in this redemptive work. Of recognizing that God is about a redemptive work all around us, in the desert and today. And it's for the sake of those who otherwise, like us, cannot redeem themselves. There's no way the Israelites could have redeemed themselves. There's no way we have a hope apart from Jesus Christ. God has stepped into our story by giving his own son for our sake. The taking upon himself the death and rising again, promising us resurrection. That is wholeness, that is fullness, that allows us to step into the most scary and unknown situations and to join alongside others in proclaiming this hope and this redemption. The motivation of Sabbath is that we imitate God's act of rest after creating the world and in remembrance of Israel's release from slavery in Egypt, and thus a relief measure for those who otherwise cannot redeem themselves. Now, there's great lengths of the Israelites over that time between the giving of the commandments to about the time that Jesus shows up on the scene. There's a lot that they went to kind of protect this. And they finally figured out that they could go about 2,000 cubits. Okay, so about 900 yards or so, about 1,000 yards roughly. They could go so far on a Sabbath day. But they could just kind of manipulate that and say, well, if I put some food over here, then that can kind of be my new home, and I can go about 2,000 more cubits, and I'll put a little bit of food over there, and I just kind of manipulate this to be my own way. And that is not at all what Sabbath is about. They looked at it from the backwards way, didn't they? Of saying, man, this is constricting. But friends, if we look at it this way, if we view what we have been given as an opportunity to join God in his redemptive work, it changes everything. See, Sabbath is a call for a community to be in community with one another. Sabbath is given not to individuals. Sabbath is given to the Israelites as a community. There wasn't some manna over here for these people. There wasn't like a rotating schedule. Okay, you take these days and you'll get manna. You take these days and you'll get manna. You take these days. No, it was a call for a community to be in community together. They had to put up with the stink of their neighbor that took too much manna. They got to help out their neighbor when they didn't get 2 days worth on day 6. There's a call for community to be in community together, to recognize that we step out with this hope, with this redemption, and we get to care for one another. Practically, it gave the Israelites an opportunity to look to the needs and cares of others. And that is the heart of Sabbath throughout. God entered into our story on his rest, out of his fullness, so that we can do that for others. As people of Community Covenant Church, if you consider Community Covenant Church your church home, we need to rest. We need to gather together out of the fullness of who God is in the work that he is doing for our benefit and the benefit of others. I don't know if you've considered this or not, but coming and gathering together, being a part of a community group, anything that we get to do together, yes, benefits you, but allows you to step into a need that you so desperately fill in the lives of others around you. If you were absent from this picture, it would be less clear, less full, less hope-filled, less redemptive. Even to the person that is in this room that you cannot stand. Friends, This is a call for us to be in community with one another, in community with one another, for our community to be in community with one another. You are desperately needed in the lives of others around you. Your investment in the lives of those who are being built up in Christ and those far from Christ is desperately needed. And so we prioritize gathering together. We prioritize gathering together because in doing so, we are saying that we value the people around us more than we value whatever it is that we could otherwise be doing. God doesn't look at us and say, hey, I expect you to give all of your time. He calls us instead to participate in the lives of others. And in doing so, what happens is it roots our heart and mind back to His provision, His redemptive work, His authority. See, finally this morning in Sabbath, we acknowledge God's provision and redemption. In Sabbath, we acknowledge God's provision and redemption and affirm our participation in submission to His authority. You think you have a work problem? I have a little bit of an addiction to work, all right? I like to be moving. I like to be doing stuff. I don't usually accomplish a whole lot, but I find that in times of like serious rest, I get agitated. It's not the best for me. I have an addiction to work. But in Sabbath, we're acknowledging that it doesn't matter how much we work. Our true provision and our true redemption comes from God. Now, if you think that you have an addiction to work, think about the Israelites. For 400 years, their whole culture, their whole well-being, their whole value has been on their productivity. And so in the midst of that, God says, no, you have value because I created you. You don't have value because you're a slave and because what you do on behalf of your slave owner. He says, no, you have value and you have worth because I see you, because I've entered into your story. In Sabbath, it gives us an opportunity to step back and say, I really could accomplish nothing today, and it would not diminish the love that God has for me. In Sabbath, we acknowledge God's provision and His redemption, and we affirm our participation as we submit to His authority. God, I don't know what you're doing. God, there is chaos all around me. God, I don't know that there tomorrow is going to be provision, but I'm trusting you that you will be the one that provides. I don't have a certainty. I don't see on the horizon that manna is going to be delivered tomorrow morning. But you've said that you will provide. You've said that Jesus is enough. You've said that you, through Jesus Christ, are the provision and the redemption for me. That my sins are covered, that I've been invited into a relationship with you, God, because of your Son. And I want to participate in that. I want to submit and surrender my whole life, everything about me, to your authority. This is what Sabbath allows us to do. This is why God prioritizes this for these people that He has brought into relationship with Him. He doesn't say, if you do Sabbath, then I'll love you. No, He says, look, I've given you this gift of Sabbath. I've given you this gift of rest. I've given you this gift of my wholeness made known so that you can truly experience peace, so that you can truly rest, so that you can truly know that I'm the one who provides.